Hello, my name is Dr. Aditi, and you've already met Ollie, our very lazy TA, who will be snoozing for the remainder of the presentation, but he will be back with a riddle at the end of this presentation as a summative assessment of sorts, I guess. So today we're talking about the types of tissues. So let's get cracking. When thinking about the types of tissue in the body, I like to think of it like a bunch of superheroes. Each type of tissue is a superhero with their own special powers, right? They're tissues or heroes that keep your body strong, moving, and connected. So let me introduce you to all four. We've got the fantastic four, I call them, of human tissues. First, we have epithelial tissue. Now, this is going to be the shield guardian. This superhero is very good at defending your body, whether it's the covering and protecting everything from your skin all the way to the linings of your organs. Now, no villains or germs can get past this vigilant protector. He's got a shield, and he's also got a first aid kit just ready to regenerate and fix anything that happens. Also got a bunch of band-aids because you can't have too many band-aids, can you? Then we've got connective tissue. This would be the strong builder with its power to sort of hold things together like glue. That's why he's got a bottle of glue in his hand, and it sort of creates the scaffolding for your body, right? Creates the strong framework of bones and ligaments. But it also stores, you see that little pouch of fat, it stores energy and delivers nutrients. So that's another superpower that the connective tissue has. Muscle tissue, that's the mighty mover. Makes sense, right? He's strong, very fast. This hero or tissue powers every action, from blinking our eyes to running marathon. It's flexing, lifting, pumping your heart, etc. This muscle tissue is always on the move. And then finally, we've got nervous tissue. This is the signal sender. This genius hero of tissues processes and relays messages at lightning speed to make sure that everything is working in sync and the body communicates and works in perfect harmony. So together, these four superheroes are the ones that keep our body strong and safe and unstoppable. They're like the fantastic four of the body. And today we're going to uncover all the powers for each of these tissues and see them in action. So let's go. So the very first tissue we're going to talk about is epithelial tissue, and this is the barrier extraordinaire, right? Epithelial tissue forms a protective barrier and regulates what comes in and exits the body, from absorbing nutrients in the intestines to blocking harmful pathogens on our skin. Epithelial tissue is integral in protecting us. But it also does a lot more. It has this incredible ability to regenerate very quickly. And this is why skin wounds heal so fast, right? And also another property is epithelial tissue forms boundaries, not only between our body and the outside world, but also within our body, right? All our organs have these epithelial linings that sort of contain them and separate them from each other. Otherwise, there'd be a big hodgepodge of everything. And there would be no regulation either, right? It helps regulate what comes in and out. So they're sort of like security guards, boundary, the stormtroopers, I guess, of the world. And they really compartmentalize things and create this sort of border control between what can come in and what can go out. So that is your shield guardian and epithelial tissue. Given that epithelia are found in different locations, we can infer that they're not all going to look the same, right? They're going to be different types in different locations. So the epithelia on my skin is going to look very different than the epithelia inside my organs. So I'm just going to go through all of them. There's several. And again, this is not an in-depth explanation of epithelia tissue, just sort of an overview. So the first one is going to be simple squamous epithelium. Now think of this as a sheet of paper, very thin, very delicate, ideal for areas of quick exchange of substances like gas exchange in the lungs or filtration in the kidneys. These are flat, pancake-looking cells with a nucleus and not much else, compared to cuboidal epithelium, simple cuboidal, which is a row of cube-like packed boxes of cells. These are very compact and very efficient for secretion absorption. So they're going to be in glands or kidney tubules. So they are going to have a lot more organelles than the simple squamous, because the pancake shape doesn't have a lot of space for organelles like Golgi apparatus and all that. That's all going to be in your cuboidal cells, which makes sense because they have a more complex function. Okay, next type is going to be simple columnar epithelium. Imagine a tall set of soda bottles lined up on the shelf. That's what I envision when I think of simple columnar. It's just one row, but it's these tall columnar type cells, and they allow for more complex processes like absorption in the intestines or secretion of mucus in the stomach, or even in your trachea. Like think about the mucus there and see those little finger-like projections on the top. Those are cilia, and that help move mucus with pathogens that are trapped in it away to be excreted from the body, for example. And then we've got stratified squamous epithelium. Now this resembles layers of bricks on a wall. They're sort of stacked for durability and protection, and they can be sloughed off if necessary. Like you can lose some, it's okay, in places like the skin or the lining in the mouth and esophagus. They're designed to tolerate abrasions. But basically, stratified squamous cells would look like this, like layers of squished cells in a big stack, like a big stack of pancakes, for example, or a brick wall, like depicted here. All right, so are you ready for my favorite group of epithelial cells? They would be the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Why does one have a favorite? Well, the reason I like them because they're a bit sneaky and therefore easier for me to remember because they're a little bit uncharacteristic of epithelial cells. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium are illusionists. It looks like there's multiple layers of cells, but in actuality there's only one. And what I do is I picture a crowded forest of trees where some trees are tall, some are short, which gives this illusion of multiple layers, but in reality it's just different heights and it's just one layer. So these cells are found in the respiratory tract, and they also have these finger-like projections on the top that are called cilia. Cilia, along with mucus, trap pollutants and pathogens and sort of move them along to package them to get them out of the body. Now, this arrangement of pseudostratified is unique to columnar cells specifically. Remember, the base is all one layer, but the tops are uneven, so they have this illusion of looking like multiple layers where they're not actually. Okay, then we've got transitional epithelia, which would be the fun epithelia, I guess, if we were characterizing it. And I think of a stretchy balloon because this type of epithelia allows organs to expand or contract as needed. For example, in the bladder, this allows us to hold urine in various amounts until it needs to be expelled, right? And in this transitional epithelium, as you can see in the picture, it's a hodgepodge of a bunch of different types of epithelial cells. And the other thing about transitional epithelia is the name is a bit of an outlier. It doesn't quite fit nicely into the naming conventions of epithelial cells. I guess it does in some way, right? But most of the epithelial cells are named for a purpose. It's not just sort of willy-nilly. There is an actual purpose to their naming. And I have a whole video on epithelial cells that you can look at to figure that out. But the names actually correlate to what the cells look like and their function. Except for transitional, that's a little bit out of the box as far as the naming nomenclature. All right, now let's take a peek at the next type of tissue, which is nervous tissue. Now, nervous tissue forms the electrical highway of our body, right? And the key players here are neurons who communicate by transmitting electrical signals. And these signals are amazingly fast. I think I read the speed was like, I don't know, 260 plus miles per hour or something like that. So these are actually found in the brain and spinal cord and nerves. And, obviously the brain is the superpower here. The human brain is made up mainly of nervous tissue, obviously. There are about, billions, like 86, I think was the statistic I saw, billions of neurons forming absolutely trillions of connections to process and store information. And so this is the kind of tissue that has the job of like censoring stimuli from the outside environment and then transmitting messages from your brain to the other parts of the body. It could be voluntary, it could be involuntary, and it just performs a variety of sensory motor functions. Now, to be more specific, the nervous tissue is made up of 3 types of neurons and 6 types of neuroglia. So what's the difference? Well, while neurons are the superpower, neuroglia have more of a supporting role. Glia is actually Greek for glue. That's one of the things glia does. It kind of has a supporting function, but it also has a protective function because it helps maintain homeostasis, also has a facilitating function because it improves transmission of nerve impulses, and it has a primary defense mechanism against pathogens. So don't be fooled when you think, glia aren't as important as neurons. They are actually very important because they serve a lot of roles to the star player, which is the neuron. All right, so let's go through the different types of neurons and nervous tissue that is found. The first 4 are actually found in the central nervous system, and the astrocyte is the first one. Now, this is the star-shaped ones that you see, and I sort of equate it to like a GPS system because they have many extensions, kind of resembling a chart or a map, I guess, and they guide the neurons to the proper connections and help maintain environment around neurons, like the GPS, ensuring safe and efficient navigation. Now, the function of astrocytes is to support and nourish by regulating the blood-brain barrier to maintain this sort of chemical balance or homeostasis. The next one we have is microglia. And this is like the microscopic cleaning crew, right? Because they're very small cells, but they act like janitors or scavengers, constantly roaming around and cleaning everything up, like cleaning up debris and dead cells and pathogens that are in the brain and spinal cord. So they're actually very handy to have. All right, let's take a look at the next set. We've got oligodendrocytes. These are my favorite, if I had to pick one, because they just look so fun, right? They look like octopus, don't they? They do absolutely look like an octopus with all their sort of projections. they have these multiple arm-like processes that extend and wrap around axons, forming what we call the myelin sheath. And as you know, the myelin sheath really insulates the neurons and helps facilitate transmission of nerve signals. So because they resemble an octopus sort of securing electrical wire, that's kind of what I think of. Okay, the next are ependymal cells. I don't know how you say it actually, but for them, they remind me of pool filters. You know, I don't know if you have a pool or you grew up around a pool. If you look at pool filters, what they do is they keep the water clean and flowing smoothly. And that's what ependymal cells do. They line the ventricles and the central canal, facilitating the flow of cerebrospinal fluid, actually. So they also help filter and monitor the composition of cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, ensuring that it remains healthy and balanced for the brain and the spinal cord in order to function optimally. So again, you can see how it's sort of the analogy with the swimming pool filter. So both these roles are really about fluid circulation and maintenance. All right. Let's take a look at the next few. The last two, now these are found in the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. The first one we're going to talk about are the satellite cells. Now, the satellite cells are like nesting birds protecting their eggs. That's how I sort of view them, because they sort of also look like that if you look at the picture. You know, it's sort of like surrounding and protecting things, right? Just as birds build nests around their eggs to shield them from harm, or temperature regulation, you know, to make sure that, you know, the chicks grow in a safe environment, or eggs hatch in a safe environment. Satellite cells wrap themselves around cell bodies of neurons in the peripheral nervous system, and they also provide protection, nourishment, and stability. So the satellite is one that sort of wraps around. Then we've got, let's see, Schwann cells. Now these are the counterpart of oligodendrocytes in the CNS, but these are in the peripheral nervous system. And the analogy here that I like to use is basically like rolling up a carpet, you know, into the spiral wrap. So the Schwann cells, what they do is they wrap around axons in a spiraling manner, and they roll it up like this carpet being rolled up, or electrical tape around cord, you know, something like that. And what they do is help with facilitating nerve transmissions. So you can see both these cells have a very nurturing and protective role of nervous tissue. Okay, it's time to look at muscle tissue, the next type of tissue in our body. Now, this has 3 varieties and 3 functions. Fairly easy to remember. Obviously, you know, skeletal muscle moves bones, right? Cardiac muscle pumps blood, and then smooth muscle manages our involuntary actions like digestion or blood vessel constriction. Now, the energy demands are interesting for muscle tissue, right? Muscle tissue uses a lot of energy. Skeletal muscle can account to up to 85% of body heat through contraction, so it does play a role in thermoregulation. Let's dive into each type. So skeletal muscle, as you can see, as far as appearance, looks a lot like, you know, railroad tracks, right? Very parallel, and they have these striations or stripes that are very well organized and linear. And you can usually tell skeletal muscle due to this stripiness or parallel fibers or striations. Just like imagine, I don't know if you're a chef or when you're cooking steak or chicken, think about what that looks like before you cook it, and you're going to see there are some striations apparent. Also, this type of muscle tissue has multiple nuclei because obviously it's the most forceful, right? It has a lot of nuclei that need to sort of coordinate things. And these nuclei are dark dots that you can typically see. I don't know if you can see in the slide very well, but you can see them very easily. And they tend to be in the peripheral aspects of the muscle tissue. Functions, again, think of skeletal muscle as like gears on a bicycle, for example. You're consciously controlling it and moving it in a coordinated way to power motion in your everyday movements. And then we've got cardiac muscle. Now, this to me looks a lot like a woven basket. Does it look like that to you? Like, that's what I picture when I think of cardiac muscles, because it's got this sort of branching fiber and they are striations, which they're sort of interlocked, right? And this provides strength and efficiency. So these branching fibers sort of interlock and provide super strength and efficiency, which we need for cardiac muscle. And the other thing about cardiac muscle, it's more of a rectangular shaped. And it has single or one or two nuclei, depends, but more likely it's single nuclei. And that's the dead giveaway that it is cardiac muscle. That's one way you can tell. And it also has these intercalated discs. Now, intercalated discs have these little passages that are open between cardiac cells. And what these do is they let messages pass super quickly from cell to cell, which makes sense, right? If you think about the function of cardiac muscle, it's to pump. And when your heart pumps, depolarization occurs, for example, or polarization, but that has to happen really fast, right? You can't have a lag. So these intercalated discs or these windows, I guess, enable that to happen really fast and efficiently. Now, lastly, we've got smooth muscle. And one thing I've noticed in anatomy, they're very linear. There's no sort of pretense in their nomenclature or naming things. So smooth muscle is exactly what it says. It looks smooth. It's flexible, smooth, much like, I'm a therapist, so like TheraBand, or a rubber band. There's no stripes. It's uniform, not striated. And these are going to be uber flexible, and they are the great squeezers of the body, right? They line hollow organs like the GI tract, urinary tract, for example, or the urethra. Now, this muscle type that surrounds organs, they need to be able to expand and constrict like blood vessels, uterus, and the bladder, right? They need that ability, and that's what smooth muscle offers them. And as far as function, I think of it like a conveyor belt, right? Steadily and automatically moving things and items, like moving things through the digestive system or through our blood system. And it does not require any conscious control, right? It just sort of happens and we don't even know it's happening. So those are the three classifications. Now I want to really talk about how you can figure out the difference between skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle when you're looking at a histology slide, right? Because in a textbook, it looks fairly easy to sort of figure it out. But remember, when you're looking at histology, it can look a little bit hodgepodgey and it can be a bit tricky. So the method I use is you have to ask yourself some very specific questions. The first thing you want to ask yourself is how many nuclei are present. Now, if there are one or two nuclei, that's going to be the difference between cardiac and smooth versus skeletal, because we know multiple nuclei means that it's skeletal muscle. And if it's one or two nuclei, you're going to have to ask yourself, is it striated? Because then that's going to be the distinguishing factor between cardiac and smooth, right? So if it is striated, then we know it's cardiac. If it's not striated, then obviously we know it's smooth muscle. So let's give it a go on this next slide. So this is the histology slide you have. You have to figure out if it is cardiac, smooth, or skeletal muscle. So the first thing, again, you're asking yourself is how many nuclei are present and how many do you see? Do you see multiple or do you see one or two per muscle tissue? So this might look a bit tricky, but for the most part, there are actually just one or two nuclei, right, that are present. And you'll see the distinct difference once you see skeletal. The nuclei also are in the very periphery and they're not as bold looking. So that's something to remember. Now, we figured out that it's just one or two nuclei. And so now we have to go, well, is it striated? And yes, it is striated. So now we know it's got to be cardiac muscle, right? Now, obviously, you can just look at the striations and skip the nuclei pie and go, okay, now I know it's got to be either skeletal or cardiac, and then figure out, do you see any branched fibers? You know, there are other ways to do it, but I just think this is a simple cheat sheet sort of way to do things. All right, so are you ready for the last set of tissues in the body, which are connective tissue? Now, connective tissue not only provides structural support like bones and cartilage, but it also stores energy in the form of adipose tissue or fat, right? So that's something I think a lot of people forget. They always think about bones and cartilage, but they don't always think about fat deposits being a form of storage and energy. Now, the body's glue, which is collagen, is a major component of connective tissue and is the most abundant protein in the human body. And that's what gives our body this sort of elasticity and also strength overall. So let's take a look at the different types or subcategories of connective tissue within this. And unfortunately, there are quite a few, so bear with me. Okay, the first set are connective tissue proper, which that name just makes me laugh. But anyway, under that, we've got loose and we've got dense connective tissue, right? And so that's going to be very poignantly apparent in the histology of things. If you look at loose connective tissue, that's going to include areola, adipose, and reticular. And then this is probably going to be found in the kidneys, things like that. And then you've also got dense connective tissues. Now, dense connective tissue has further subcategories of dense regular, dense irregular, and then elastic in the middle. Then we've got supportive connective tissue, and that makes absolute sense, right? That's going to be your cartilage, anything that, like the name implies, is supportive. So anything with cartilage, and the three categories of cartilage tissue, you've got hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic. And then of course, bone is included in this category. And then we've got fluid connective tissue. Now, I'm guaranteeing you that most people don't think about blood and lymph as connective tissue, right? I think most people think of it as a separate entity in itself, but it is part of this category of tissues. All right, let's take a look at each of those subcategories. So now we're looking at connective tissue proper, and we're looking at loose, that subcategory. So the first one is going to be areolar tissue. Now, to me, areolar tissue looks like packing peanuts. And what it does, it cushions and fills space around organs, basically providing sort of flexible support and space for nutrients and waste to move, right? Just gives a little bit of leeway. Then we've got adipose tissue, and I think of that like a thermal blanket. It stores energy and insulates the body while also cushioning internal structures. And then we've got reticular, which reminds me of a spider web because it provides, well, it kind of looks like that. It's got these like black spindly parts, but it provides a supportive network, especially for soft organs like the spleen or lymph nodes. So you could see that connective tissue proper, the loose category, provides a lot of like fill-in space support in my mind. Okay, now let's take a look at connective tissue proper but dense. We already did loose, now we're talking about dense. Dense regular tissue is going to look like you see in the picture, very pink, and if someone looks like these tightly bundled up rope or parallel collagen fibers that give it the strength. And it's going to be found ideally in tendons and ligaments. Think of ropes, right? That's how our ligaments sort of look. Now, then the next category within here are dense irregular tissue. And I think of this like a thick quilt with fibers sort of woven in different directions, because it provides a lot of durability and resistance to stress from all angles. Like an example would be the dermis of the skin. That is dense irregular tissue, and it provides a lot of that durability and resistance from stress that we're looking for. Okay, and then we've got elastic, which, like the name suggests, you know, it's like a rubber band, or in this case, a TheraBand is what's depicted here. And it allows structures like arteries and lungs to sort of stretch and recoil. So if you look at the name, it does sort of clue you into what it's used for, right? Dense regular is going to be very tightly woven. So tendons and ligaments. Dense irregular is a bit of a hodgepodgey, but those irregularities are what give it its tensile strength, which is going to be very important for durability, like in the skin. So that's just one way to sort of categorize and remember these. The next subcategory we're going to look at is supportive connective tissue, specifically cartilage. Now, cartilage has three other subcategories under it. The first one being hyaline cartilage. And hyaline cartilage looks somewhat like an eraser to me. It's very smooth, yet it's very firm, right? And hyaline cartilage provides cushion and reduces friction in joints. And it has a very special role that people don't always think about. Cartilage also serves as a precursor to bone in embryos. So our bones actually start off as cartilage and then become bone. All right, the next one is fibrocartilage. And this to me is like that tough rubber boots, you know, those wellies that you wear, Wellington boots. And what it does is it sort of absorbs shock and resists compression, as in, you know, it's found in intervertebral discs or the menisci of the knee, or meniscus of the knee, for example. So that's going to be your fibrocartilage. And then lastly, we've got elastic cartilage. Now that's going to be like a flexible earplug that you pop in there, and it maintains structure but allows for bending and resilience, just like our ear does. You know, it's very resilient to being bent and moved in other directions. This is also going to be found in your epiglottis because, again, it allows for bending and resilience. The second part of supportive connective tissue refers to bone, and bone actually has two categories within it. So what we want to look at is the compact bone first, which is this top picture over here, and this sort of looks like a concrete wall to me, right? It's very dense and it provides strong support and protection. So I always equate it to a concrete wall, and it actually looks like it a little bit too. And then we've got spongy bone, which is at the bottom. And this reminds me of a honeycomb. It's very lightweight, but it's very strong, housing bone marrow. And it also does a very important thing. It allows for shock absorption. So it's sort of the shock absorber of the body. The last connective tissue category is going to be fluid, and that's going to encompass blood and lymph. So if you look at the slide here, this is a histology slide of blood, and I think of blood like a delivery truck system. It transports oxygen, nutrients, and waste throughout the body, and in doing so, it connects tissues through its circulation. So that's one of the elements of why it's called connective tissue, right? Okay, that's all of them. Now let's move on to a mnemonic. This is a mnemonic for you to be able to remember the 4 types of tissues in the body. Every cat must nap. Although, truth be told, I probably could have put a picture of Ollie snoozing here because it's his favorite pastime. But anyway, the mnemonic is every cat must nap, epithelial tissue, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. All right, lastly, I always like to end with a mind map because, again, it gives you a nice overview of everything we've talked about today. And as you can see, these are the type of tissues is what we are talking about today. We talked about epithelial tissue and the different types here. Then we've got connective tissue, and these have several categories or subcategories. So you've got proper supportive fluid, and then it gives you an example of where you might find those types of connective tissues. And then the subcategories. Under cartilage, we've got hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic, loose connective tissue, areolar, adipose and reticular, and then we've got the dense connective tissue with the dense regular, irregular, and elastic in the middle. And then we're going down here, we've got nervous tissue, which is going to be categorized in the central or the peripheral nervous system. And central, we've got astrocytes, microglia, oligodendrocytes, and ependymal cells. And then in the P and S, we've got Schwann and satellite cells. Then, of course, we've got muscle tissue, cardiac, skeletal, and smooth. So this is just a very basic mind map. You can add more information to this if you want to. But I always recommend doing a mind map after you cover a topic because it sort of brings everything together, so you're not learning concepts in isolation, because the body is not in isolation, right? Everything has to work together. Okay, before we move on to Ollie and our riddle of the day, I just wanted to mention that I do have an ebook specifically for this episode that has a crossword, fill in the blank exercises, and a mind map template in case you'd like to practice and really reinforce all that you've learned today. So feel free to go to my website, but now it's time for Ollie.